They called it the silent comfort, a powder of dreams hidden in teacups, behind curtains, and in the tired eyes of London's women. Welcome, wanderers of the night. If this is your first evening with us, may it be the beginning. Subscribe, and join us on every gentle journey through history. London, in the early 19th century, did not sleep easily. Its streets were narrow and damp, lined with brick that seemed to sweat in the fog. Coal smoke curled into the sky, staining it gray by day and black by night. The city breathed in long, uneven sighs, and within its walls lived millions who worked, endured, and dreamed. Horse hooves echoed softly on cobblestone streets, mingling with the low murmur of distant voices and the occasional clatter of a market cart. The air carried smells of soot, wet leather, boiling cabbage, and the faint tang of river water flowing sluggishly past worn docks. For the poor, life was a grind of survival. Women carried water from pumps, scrubbed floors, and baked bread in communal ovens. Men labored in factories, on construction sites, and in docks where crates were heavy and hours long. Children, barefoot in alleys, sold matches, flowers, or newspapers, their small voices cutting through the fog. For the wealthy, life was performance, measured in drawing rooms, in carriage rides, in dinners and visits. Yet across all classes, on wooden tables in taverns, in gilded parlors, and in the quiet corners of apothecaries, there was one common, quiet companion, opium. It arrived without announcement. It came not with the flash of scandal, but as a discreet promise. A powder, a tincture, a bitter liquid softened in tea or sweetened water. It was first introduced as medicine, trusted by physicians, midwives, and even mothers who had little else to calm a child's fever or their own aching limbs. It was the answer to sleepless nights, persistent coughs, and the exhaustion of endless labor. By the 1820s, bottles of laudanum, the amber liquid made of opium and alcohol, were found in nearly every household. Apothecaries sold it openly. Mothers carried it in small brown bottles, tucked beneath shawls. It was measured in tiny doses with careful spoons, yet the effect spread quietly, warming the body, softening thoughts, and smoothing the jagged edges of a long day. Women, in particular, found in opium both shield and chain. A seamstress could sip a few drops before heading to the workhouse at dawn, bracing herself against the chill and the ache of endless hours bent over needle and thread. A laundress could quiet her trembling hands after scrubbing clothes in icy water for hours. An elderly widow could ease the loneliness of a dim room with the same amber drops that once soothed the fever of a child long grown. Even in the homes of the upper classes, where silks and candlelight offered comfort, women used it to dull nerves that could not rest, to soften anxiety, to escape the unspoken demands of propriety. It promised rest. It promised calm. It promised a brief retreat from the unyielding rhythms of work, hunger, and expectation. Yet promises, like the fog over the Thames, often drifted away. They left a lingering haze of dependence, a subtle reshaping of daily life that few noticed, and fewer spoke about. Imagine, for a moment, a narrow, rain-slick street in Whitechapel. The gas lamps glow dimly, casting golden pools that seem almost alive. A young mother walks with her child in her arms, shawl wrapped tight against the damp. In her pocket, a small brown veil rests, clinking softly as she walks. She purchased it from the corner chemist that morning, a trusted presence whose shelves held remedies for every cough, pain, and fear. She does not hide it, nor boast of it. It is simply part of the rhythm of the day, the same way one might pause to eat, or to drink a cup of warm tea on a cold morning. The city itself seems aware of this quiet presence. The factories hum in the background, their whistles signaling hours long past sunset. Horses snort as they step over puddles reflecting the flicker of lanterns. The Thames gurgles beneath the bridges, carrying away whispers of life and death alike. Within this tapestry, opium threads its way through homes and hearts, both mundane and secret, shaping the nights of those who live here. Even in the darkest corners, opium casts its influence softly. In small rooms above bakeries or along narrow alleyways, women prepare the nightly doses. Some for themselves, some for children who cry with teething pain or fever. Others for neighbors, sharing what little they have in a city where survival requires ingenuity. The smell of the liquid, bitter, almost sweet when warmed, mixes with the smell of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint tang of unwashed skin. It is in these quiet moments, in the hush between chores and sleep, that the city's women create a fragile balance. They walk between endurance and escape, between necessity and dependence. In the shadows, opium is both the balm and the invisible chain, a ritual that softens the world just enough for them to survive another day. And so we begin our story, not with scandal or loud proclamations, but with the everyday life of women quietly threading opium into the fabric of London. Not because they sought indulgence, but because the city offered so little relief otherwise. Not because they wished to rebel, but because a small bottle of amber liquid could hold within it the briefest, gentlest promise, rest, warmth, and a momentary escape from the unyielding rhythm of life. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, opium had already traveled a long, winding path to reach London streets. It was no stranger to the world. For centuries, it had been cultivated in distant lands, its roots in the rugged mountains of Persia and the fertile plains of India, its trade routes stretching across oceans and deserts. It arrived in London quietly, through the channels of empire, commerce, and curiosity. Ships returned from the east laden with exotic teas, silks, and spices, but among these treasures were the small, unassuming sacks of opium. At first, opium was a curiosity, discussed in scientific journals, examined in apothecaries, and tested by doctors in their studies. Its effects, pain relief, sedation, and the softening of anxious thought, were recorded with meticulous care. Physicians prescribed it for coughs that lingered through the winter, for fevers that weakened the body, for nerves frayed by the harsh rhythm of daily life. It became part of the standard toolkit of medicine, trusted, measured, and sometimes feared. Yet, as it entered homes, it slowly became more than medicine. Women, who faced the relentless demands of labor, childbirth, childrearing, and social expectation, found in it a quiet companion. The daily routine of a London woman in the early 1800s was unrelenting. Dawn began with rising before the sun, stoking fires, boiling water, preparing food for children and family members, washing, cleaning, and sewing. Markets and streets were filled with noise, dust, and danger. The threat of theft, disease, or accident was constant. By nightfall, when bodies ached and minds trembled with fatigue, a small dose of laudanum could soften the edges of exhaustion. It was available in chemist shops and apothecaries, often sold alongside other household necessities. Mothers knew which bottles to buy, how many drops to give, and at what hour of the day. It was sold openly, quietly, without the stigma we might imagine today. The Victorian emphasis on propriety and respectability often masked the presence of opium, allowing it to weave into the daily fabric of life. A mother might give a few drops to a sick child, another to herself, and yet another to a neighbor seeking relief from the cold and weariness of work. The spread of opium was subtle, like the drift of fog over the Thames. It was not a matter of grand conspiracies or secret societies, but of small decisions repeated countless times: the mother who could not bear another night of her infant's cries, the seamstress whose hands were raw from hours of stitching, the gentlewoman whose nerves were frayed by the expectation of calm, perfect conduct. In every case, opium became both comfort and necessity, its amber warmth a temporary reprieve from a city that demanded relentless endurance. Even the language of the city absorbed its presence. It became part of conversation, quietly acknowledged, rarely discussed openly. A few drops of laudanum, one woman might say to another in the privacy of a kitchen, and the little one will sleep. There was no shame in these words, only the understanding of shared hardship. The medicinal aspect of opium granted legitimacy, and the knowledge of its potency made its use measured and careful. Meanwhile, London itself seemed complicit. The gas lamps flickered over streets where shadows gathered, the river flowed silently beneath bridges, and fog muffled the footsteps of those moving through the night. In these quiet spaces, opium's influence spread, in homes, in workshops, in orphanages, and in the hidden rooms above bakeries and taverns. It softened bodies and dulled minds, and yet it was, in many ways, invisible. Some women became dependent without realizing it, their nights and mornings punctuated by the measured ritual of drops and sips. Others used it sparingly, as one might use a blanket against a particularly cold winter night. All shared, however, a sense of relief, a temporary withdrawal from the harshness of London streets, the endless labor, and the expectations placed upon them. Opium also intersected with the emerging medical world in curious ways. Doctors and apothecaries observed its effects with scientific precision, noting the sleep it induced, the easing of pain, and the occasional tremors of overuse. Advice columns in newspapers and manuals on household management recommended it for women in delicate health, for nerves frayed by childbirth, and for children suffering from teething or colic. In this manner, it became normalized, a part of life so ordinary that even the city's harshest observers hardly questioned it. By the end of this period, the presence of opium in London was woven deeply into the lives of women across classes. From the humble mother struggling to survive in a cramped tenement, to the gentlewoman in her drawing room with candlelight flickering on polished furniture, opium offered a quiet escape. It was a companion in the night, a balm for pain, and, for some, the first step toward a dependence that would remain hidden in the shadows of one of the world's busiest cities. Within the narrow, winding streets of early 19th-century London, homes held quiet dramas unseen by the bustling city outside. The tenements, with their wooden staircases and thin walls, were alive with the low murmurs of women tending to children, boiling water, and preparing simple meals. Fires crackled in small hearths, illuminating the faces of weary mothers and daughters, their eyes lined with fatigue from hours of labor, the soot of the streets clinging stubbornly to their skin. In these intimate spaces, opium moved like a silent visitor, threading itself gently into the rhythm of domestic life. Imagine a mother, her hands raw from scrubbing laundry in cold water, her body stiff from bending over damp floors. The day has been long, her children crying with hunger, the fire sputtering weakly in the hearth. A small brown bottle rests on the shelf, its amber liquid catching the flicker of candlelight. With measured care, she draws a few drops into a teaspoon, a simple ritual repeated countless times across the city. She administers it to the youngest child first, a soothing balm against teething pain and restlessness. The child's cries soften, then cease, replaced by the gentle rhythm of sleep. The mother, seeing the small chest rise and fall in calm, allows herself the same sip. It is not indulgence, nor rebellion, but a quiet necessity, a way to soften the edges of exhaustion that threaten to overwhelm. In these moments, she can breathe, her mind unburdened for a few precious minutes from the relentless weight of care. The warmth spreads slowly, wrapping her in a fog of drowsy comfort. The smell is faintly sweet, bitter in taste, yet strangely calming. It is a nightly companion, almost invisible, yet present in every careful step of her domestic life. In wealthier households, the practice took a slightly different form. Gentlewomen, trapped in the gilded cages of expectation, moved through drawing rooms lit by oil lamps and candlelight. Their days were filled with embroidery, hosting visitors, and maintaining appearances, a constant performance that could fray nerves. A sip of laudanum became a secret reprieve, measured with care, taken before bed or after an exhausting morning. In these homes, the amber liquid was kept in fine glass vials, etched and polished, resting among other remedies on shelves lined with curiosity and caution. The presence of opium in homes was rarely questioned openly. It was medicine, after all. Doctors recommended it for sleepless nights, for fevers, for the delicate nerves of women recovering from childbirth. Midwives carried small vials in baskets, administering it to infants suffering from colic or mothers battling postnatal weakness. Apothecaries instructed on the careful dosage, the slow drops that could comfort without overwhelming. In the flickering candlelight of countless kitchens and bedrooms, the line between cure and habit blurred, unnoticed by those who relied upon it daily. Children often learned early to associate opium with relief. In the cold, damp rooms of tenements, it softened fevers, quieted restlessness, and brought the rare luxury of uninterrupted sleep. The scent of the warm, bitter liquid became familiar, a subtle marker of care and comfort. Mothers might recount to each other the exact number of drops required, sharing knowledge with the quiet pride of survival. And yet, beneath this practical use, a quiet danger took root. Repeated nightly doses shaped routines, and dependence grew almost invisibly, like ivy climbing walls, soft but persistent. The city itself seemed to hold its breath around these domestic rituals. Gas lamps flickered outside, casting long, shifting shadows across narrow streets. The river, sluggish beneath the bridges, mirrored the pale moonlight, while the fog curled silently around corners, muffling footsteps. Within this muted world, opium performed its subtle work, calming, soothing, masking the fatigue, the pain, the relentless grinding of life. Women moved through their homes with quiet grace, the amber liquid in tiny vials a secret partner in the choreography of daily survival. Even the simplest homes, with rough wooden floors and single-room layouts, became arenas for the quiet management of exhaustion. Meals were cooked, clothes washed, children soothed, fires stoked, all under the careful watch of opium's presence. It was a rhythm, almost unnoticed, yet as integral as the tick of a clock or the rise and fall of the tide. The city outside remained indifferent, its markets, factories, and streets indifferent to the private strategies of survival practiced within these walls. Over time, women adapted their lives around the gentle haze of laudanum. Some measured doses for themselves, others shared them with children or neighbors. The practice became intertwined with domestic routine, the evening wash, the final feeding, the moment of quiet before sleep. Its effects were subtle but profound, softening the harsh textures of daily labor, dulling the edges of constant anxiety, and providing a private, almost imperceptible comfort. Even as opium brought solace, it also quietly reshaped behavior. Dependence was rarely recognized immediately, its presence was normalized as part of caring for children, for tending a home, for managing the endless weight of domestic labor. Women walked a delicate line, balancing relief with moderation, survival with the growing whisper of reliance. In these homes, opium was both ally and invisible chain, a constant, measured companion through nights long and cold, through days heavy with work, through a city that demanded endurance above all else. The calmness it brought was deceptive. It allowed mothers to function, to soothe, to survive. Yet beneath the surface, it wove a delicate web, the comfort of relief entwined with the risk of subtle, creeping dependence. And still, London's women persisted. They carried on with chores, meals, and care, each day a quiet testament to endurance, each night softened by the amber liquid that lay in plain sight yet remained secret in its power. The streets of London in the early 19th century were never truly silent. Even as night fell and the lamps flickered along narrow alleys, the city pulsed with subtle rhythms. Horses clopped along cobblestones, carriages rattled, and the occasional cry of a street seller punctuated the quiet. But behind the facades of brick and timber, another rhythm persisted, one that moved through kitchens, parlors, and tenements alike, the quiet, pervasive presence of opium. In these neighborhoods, women were both observers and participants in the delicate dance of survival. While the public spaces brimmed with activity and occasional danger, private spaces allowed a kind of freedom, a momentary reprieve from labor and societal expectation. Opium became a companion in these domestic theaters, shared subtly among women who understood each other's exhaustion, worry, and desire for calm. The knowledge of how to prepare and administer laudanum was passed quietly from mother to daughter, from neighbor to neighbor, as naturally as the passing down of recipes or laundry techniques. It was, in many ways, a community secret. While opium was legal and medically sanctioned, its use for everyday relief in the home was a private matter. Women discussed dosages in hushed tones, often while standing by the hearth or attending to chores, their voices low so as not to attract attention. A few drops could mean the difference between a sleepless, stressful night and a few hours of much-needed rest. It was both medicine and comfort, a way to maintain the balance of life in a city that demanded endurance above all else. Yet opium's presence was not confined to the home. Markets, apothecaries, and chemists' shops carried vials of laudanum alongside spices, teas, and household necessities. The sight of these bottles on shelves was common, yet the knowledge of their potency was widespread among those who used them daily. The chemist's counter became a quiet intersection of necessity and discretion, where women consulted, purchased, and measured their amber lifeline with careful precision. It was not a spectacle, it was routine, a ritual embedded in the rhythms of the city. The social fabric of neighborhoods subtly adapted to accommodate this quiet reliance. Mothers exchanged advice while gathering water or washing clothes, sharing both practical tips and guidance on how to soothe restless children with minimal doses. Even within wealthier districts, women whispered recommendations in drawing rooms, balancing propriety with the secret acknowledgement of shared struggles. The act of administering opium became both communal and deeply personal, a bridge between private suffering and public survival. In the streets, however, the city remained largely indifferent. Londoners moved past each other with brisk efficiency, unaware of the subtle networks of care and relief woven behind closed doors. The fog softened the clatter of boots on cobblestones, and the gaslight cast long shadows that obscured the quiet rituals taking place within the homes lining the alleys. Opium, like the mist, was ever-present yet almost invisible, shaping daily life without overt notice. Children, too, became acutely aware of its presence. In households where laudanum was part of the nightly routine, the sight of the amber liquid, the faint bitter smell, and the gentle hush that followed consumption became familiar markers of evening calm. Some would sleep soundly for the first time in days, others would watch as their mothers measured the drops with a calm hand, the ritual itself imparting a sense of security and order. In this way, opium became woven into the memory of childhood itself, a quiet, almost invisible companion to the early years of life. Despite its ubiquity, opium remained a delicate instrument. Too much, and its calming effect could tip into dangerous dependence. Too little, and the relief it provided was insufficient. Women learned to navigate this narrow balance with careful observation, noting reactions, adjusting dosages, and sometimes sharing advice with others whose knowledge exceeded their own. It was a practice of mindfulness, of subtle observation, and of community trust, all conducted under the cover of everyday life. The quiet dependence on opium also shaped the very perception of femininity and labor. Women's endurance, often lauded in sermons and social commentary, was sustained in part by these quiet rituals of self-care. The ability to maintain the household, soothe the children, and fulfill social expectations was reinforced by the softening effect of the amber liquid. It allowed women to meet the relentless demands placed upon them, preserving both health and dignity in a society that offered few supports. As night deepened and the city quieted, the ritual of opium consumption became a final act of agency within a constrained life. The mother, having prepared the evening meal, washed the last clothes, and soothed the last crying child, allowed herself a few drops. The gentle haze of laudanum softened her awareness of fatigue, her muscles relaxed, and the tension in her mind eased. Around her, the city slept, unaware of the delicate networks of care and survival that the amber liquid enabled. Even as dependence quietly developed in some households, the city and its inhabitants adapted in subtle ways. Social norms, medical advice, and domestic routines all intersected to create a landscape in which opium could exist without dramatic consequence, at least, for a time. It was both invisible and integral, a thread woven through the fabric of women's lives, holding together households, maintaining calm, and shaping the rhythms of London's daily existence. As the nights of London deepened and the fog crept across the cobblestones, the subtle effects of opium on women's lives became more apparent. Its presence was gentle yet persistent, threading itself into routines, thoughts, and perceptions. Women awoke with the residue of sleep softened by the night's amber ritual. Their movements were slightly slower, yet deliberate, their minds, slightly dulled, yet clear enough to maintain the rhythms of daily survival. The line between relief and reliance remained thin, almost invisible, but it shaped their days in ways both subtle and profound. Children, too, felt the presence of laudanum. For infants and toddlers, administered carefully, it quieted restless cries, soothed fevers, and allowed sleep to descend like a soft curtain over small, tender bodies. In households across the city, mothers observed the slight haze of calm, noting the gentle slowing of reflexes, the softening of temperaments, and the quiet compliance that followed. Over time, these effects became normalized. The amber liquid was understood as both medicine and companion, its influence so gradual that it rarely alarmed those who relied upon it. Medical practitioners of the era were aware of the duality of opium. Apothecaries and doctors recommended it for fevers, nervous disorders, and sleeplessness, yet some cautioned against overuse. The warnings were rarely dramatic, often framed in terms of moderation rather than prohibition. It was common advice, a few drops at a time, measured carefully, administered with attention and respect for the body's limits. Even so, the cumulative effects over weeks, months, and years remained largely invisible to casual observation. The psychological consequences were equally nuanced. Women who relied on opium experienced a softening of anxiety, a calmness that allowed them to continue managing the demands of household labor, childcare, and social obligations. In a city where the pressures of poverty, disease, and labor could overwhelm the senses, this calm was both a blessing and a subtle constraint. Thoughts and emotions were gently dulled, daily struggles smoothed by the amber haze, yet always lingering beneath the surface, a quiet reminder of the delicate balance between relief and dependency. Within the walls of the home, the effects of laudanum shaped behavior in predictable patterns. The evenings were structured around quiet rituals, preparation of doses, administration to children, and finally, a small measure for oneself. The repetition created a rhythm, a slow, meditative cadence that soothed both body and mind. Even as fatigue pressed heavily on muscles and nerves, the amber liquid provided a reliable respite, reinforcing routines and anchoring households in a sense of order. Socially, the presence of opium was woven into the fabric of communal understanding. Women shared advice discreetly, noting reactions and adjusting dosages based on careful observation. The knowledge of laudanum's effects created subtle hierarchies of expertise within neighborhoods. Some mothers and neighbors became respected for their experience, their calm authority guiding the practices of those around them. This quiet exchange of knowledge reinforced social bonds and offered practical strategies for managing life in a city defined by labor, risk, and uncertainty. Yet opium's influence extended beyond calm and routine. It affected perception, shaping the way women experienced the world. Sensory impressions became softer, the sharp edges of fatigue and worry blunted. Voices, movements, and the bustling of the streets beyond the home seemed slightly more distant, as though filtered through a warm, quiet lens. Even the household's chaos, the crying children, the clattering dishes, the crackling fire, was tempered by the fog of gentle relief. The amber liquid did not erase life's demands, but it softened their impact, creating a buffer between endurance and exhaustion. Long-term, the effects were subtle but real. Women who relied on opium over many years sometimes experienced lingering weariness, a quiet dullness that contrasted with the alertness they had known before its regular use. Yet for many, the benefits outweighed the costs. The ability to maintain household stability, to soothe children, to meet social expectations, and to preserve a measure of personal calm was invaluable. In a city as demanding as London, these small advantages allowed survival to continue, night after night, year after year. Opium also shaped maternal strategies and child-rearing practices. Mothers learned to anticipate restlessness, illness, and fatigue, preparing small doses to meet predictable needs. The careful administration of laudanum became part of an almost ritualized approach to care, timing, measurement, observation. Children grew accustomed to the calm it induced, associating the amber liquid with warmth, safety, and relief. These associations, embedded in early life, reinforced the rhythm of domestic existence, linking comfort to routine, and dependency to necessity. Even as dependence remained largely invisible, its presence shaped the broader social environment. Neighborhoods adapted, shared practices normalized, and the subtle haze of opium became an unspoken layer of life. Women's endurance, often praised in sermons and social commentaries, was silently underpinned by this amber companion. It allowed households to function, communities to persist, and generations to grow in a world marked by labor, cold, and scarcity. As night deepened, the ritual reached its quiet culmination. Children slept soundly, mothers rested their weary bodies, and the city beyond hummed with a distant, muffled life. The amber liquid, carefully measured and administered, had performed its quiet work once again. Relief was granted without spectacle, comfort without disruption, and sleep descended over the households of London, soft and steady as the river's fog. By the mid-19th century, London had become a city of contrasts. Streets bustling with labourers, markets, and carriages ran alongside quieter alleys where families carried out their daily routines. Within this sprawling metropolis, opium occupied a peculiar place. It was medicine, comfort, and sometimes a social tool. Women who used laudanum daily walked a careful path between health, propriety, and the subtle scrutiny of their neighbors. Apothecaries and physicians knew opium's power. Many prescribed it openly for sleeplessness, anxiety, colic in infants, and myriad other complaints. Their guidance often emphasized moderation, though the understanding of long-term dependency was limited. The language of the day described women who relied on opium in gentle terms: delicate, nervous, or suffering from the strains of domestic labor. These phrases masked the full reality of its effects but maintained social acceptability. In the parlors of middle-class homes, women discreetly followed prescriptions, balancing doses against fatigue and household demands, while maintaining the outward appearance of composure and diligence. At the same time, social judgment hovered in the background. Women's conduct was closely observed, and morality was intertwined with respectability. Excessive reliance on opium could become a source of gossip, though small, measured doses were widely tolerated. Mothers shared advice in hushed tones: how to soothe children, how to relax after a long day of domestic labor, how to navigate the stresses of poverty or the occasional illness. These whispered exchanges reinforced both knowledge and social norms, creating a quiet network of support. In wealthier districts, laudanum was also used in parlors and drawing rooms, often seen as a mark of refinement and modern medical awareness. Ladies of the household might enjoy a measured dose before retiring to their studies, embroidery, or evening reading. The practice was framed as self-care, a gentle ritual that allowed them to endure the demands of hosting, supervising servants, and maintaining social appearances. It was medicine and leisure combined, a socially sanctioned escape from the relentless rhythms of urban life. Yet the city's doctors and reformers occasionally raised cautionary notes. Some cautioned against overuse, warning that reliance could dull perception, reduce vitality, or lead to dependency. Others framed their observations within the language of morality, moderation, temperance, and restraint were emphasized. These warnings were seldom dramatic, often couched in polite essays or discreet letters to friends. The city did not enforce strict regulations on opium use, leaving households to navigate the balance quietly and carefully. Across the social spectrum, women used opium as a tool to manage the many challenges of daily life. In crowded tenements, where heating was minimal and disease lurked in damp corners, laudanum allowed mothers to soothe both themselves and their children through long, cold nights. In quieter streets, it provided a soft buffer between fatigue and mental strain. Even as dependence could develop, the effects were subtle, largely invisible to neighbors, and framed as necessary for the maintenance of the household. The amber liquid became a thread binding the rhythms of life, meals, chores, childcare, and rest, all woven into a delicate pattern sustained by careful administration. Medical literature of the era also reflected a paradox. Physicians praised laudanum's effects while acknowledging the potential for misuse. Texts described its utility for sleeplessness, nervous disorders, and digestive complaints, often emphasizing dosage and observation. Yet they rarely captured the lived reality of women who integrated opium into daily routines, blending medicine, ritual, and social necessity. The contrast between formal advice and practical application illustrates a quiet negotiation of knowledge, a negotiation conducted in the spaces between prescribed guidance and lived experience. The ethics of opium use intersected with gender expectations. Women's labor, physical, emotional, and social, was often invisible in public accounts but relentless in private life. Laudanum offered a softening of this labor, a way to meet societal demands without complaint. The amber liquid became both a practical aid and a symbol of care, preserving dignity in the face of exhaustion. In the hush of bedrooms, kitchens, and nurseries, the ritual of consumption reaffirmed agency, even in a society that often restricted women's autonomy. As evening fell and the city's gas lamps flickered, households followed familiar rhythms. Mothers measured doses, soothed children, and prepared for the night ahead. Women paused to sip their own small portions, feeling the soft descent of tension, the gradual easing of thought and muscle. Outside, London moved on, boats along the Thames, the distant tolling of church bells, footsteps on cobblestones. Within homes, the amber haze of laudanum carried its subtle, steady influence, shaping perception, easing burden, and fostering the quiet endurance that would define daily life. Opium, in this sense, was both invisible and foundational. It connected medical advice, social expectations, and domestic rituals. Its presence was understood, unspoken, yet integral. It provided relief, shaped routines, and allowed life to continue in a city whose demands could otherwise overwhelm. It was not spectacle, not scandal, but a steady undercurrent, a companion in the long nights of London life. As London's nights stretched long and foggy over narrow streets and quiet courtyards, the use of opium among women became an unspoken thread in the fabric of urban life. It was rarely spoken aloud, yet it was widely understood. Neighbors whispered about unusual habits, subtle patterns of calm or fatigue, and the occasional reliance on the amber tincture. The city itself seemed to breathe around these quiet rituals, the rhythm of life shaped both by visible labor and invisible indulgence. In crowded neighborhoods, women observed each other with a careful, almost ritualized attention. A nod here, a quiet remark there, and small lessons passed from one household to another. Mothers taught daughters how to measure doses for children, how to soothe persistent crying, how to maintain composure through weariness and illness. The practical knowledge of laudanum's effects became a currency of intimacy, a way to share experience without judgment. Even as dependence could quietly grow, it was framed as wisdom, skill, and maternal care rather than weakness. Yet society maintained its moral lens. Periodicals, pamphlets, and occasional sermons offered commentary on the perils of opium, particularly when overuse became visible. Women were expected to manage their households, care for children, and maintain social propriety. Excessive reliance on laudanum could provoke criticism, suspicion, or gossip, but moderate, careful use was largely tolerated. It was a delicate balance, one that required both observation and discretion, teaching women to navigate the boundaries of public expectation and private necessity. The law, too, was present but diffuse. Regulations on opium were minimal compared to later decades. It was sold in apothecaries, often openly, and prescriptions were issued with a mix of caution and encouragement. Enforcement focused less on domestic use and more on public excess. As such, women operated in a space that was both legal and socially sensitive, where careful administration allowed them to meet the city's demands while preserving personal and household stability. Within this context, opium shaped subtle hierarchies and relationships. Experienced mothers and older women became informal guides, teaching neighbors and younger women how to measure doses, observe reactions, and integrate laudanum into the household routine. Their knowledge was respected, forming networks of quiet authority that influenced behavior without overt control. In this way, opium use created both dependency and community, linking households across neighborhoods in shared practice and silent understanding. Even as discretion was necessary, curiosity and fascination persisted. Observers noted that opium produced a gentle transformation in those who used it, movements became measured, speech softened, emotional responses tempered. The amber liquid created a quiet rhythm, a buffer between the demands of daily life and the mind's fatigue. This rhythm was itself a source of social stability, preserving composure in the face of illness, labor, and scarcity. Scandals, though rare, occasionally surfaced. Publicized cases of abuse, accidental overdose, or neglect provoked moral outrage, reinforcing societal norms around moderation. These instances served as cautionary tales, quietly reminding women and families of the fragile balance between relief and excess. Yet for most, the daily ritual of measured doses remained discreet, personal, and effective, allowing households to function and life to continue in the soft haze of twilight. Opium's influence was also psychological, extending beyond the immediate effects of sleep or calm. It shaped anticipation, behavior, and routine. Mothers administered doses at predictable times, aligning with meals, chores, and bedtime. The children, accustomed to this rhythm, internalized the pattern, responding with compliance and restfulness. Women, in turn, used the softening effect to maintain patience, emotional control, and mental endurance. Over time, the amber tincture became less of a substance and more of a companion, a steady presence in the quiet architecture of domestic life. In the homes of London, the effects of opium were thus pervasive yet invisible. It mediated between fatigue and duty, illness and care, public expectation and private need. Its presence created a subtle layer of social order, a rhythm that shaped days and nights alike. While the city beyond the windows moved in unpredictable patterns, the households that relied on laudanum maintained a sense of calm, continuity, and quiet control. It was a soft power, largely unseen, but profoundly influential. As night deepened, the familiar rituals unfolded once again: careful measurement, administration to children, and finally, a small sip for the mother herself. The amber liquid descended gently, carrying relief, calm, and the promise of rest. Outside, the city's gas lamps flickered through fog, shadows lengthened along cobblestones, and distant church bells tolled. Inside, the quiet hum of household life continued under the soft haze of opium. These nights, repeated countless times, wove the fabric of survival, resilience, and continuity, a subtle, amber thread running through the daily lives of London's women. As the amber haze settled in the quiet rooms of London's homes, its influence rippled outward, touching neighborhoods, streets, and even the lives of men who moved in parallel yet separate worlds. While women administered laudanum within households, the city itself was a network of observation, commerce, and labor. The subtle presence of opium shaped not only private routines but also public interactions, commerce, and social hierarchies in ways that often went unnoticed. Merchants, shopkeepers, and apothecaries played an essential role. They understood the demand, the steady, almost ritualized purchasing patterns, and the importance of measured supply. Apothecaries kept journals noting small quantities sold to women, mothers, and sometimes children, observing effects without ever overtly policing behavior. These quiet, commercial rhythms reinforced the daily cycles of households, the preparation of doses, the careful administration, and the predictable evening calm. Meanwhile, men in London, fathers, brothers, laborers, and shopkeepers, often interacted with women whose behaviors had been subtly shaped by laudanum. They observed patience, composure, and emotional steadiness, often taking these qualities for granted. In workplaces or marketplaces, the indirect effects of opium, softened temperaments, steady household management, and calm children, created a more predictable social environment. The ripple of amber quiet extended outward, contributing to the stability of families, neighborhoods, and even commercial routines. Yet society was not entirely unaware. Writers, social reformers, and some physicians documented opium use, sometimes with concern, sometimes with fascination. They noted that, beyond domestic relief, laudanum could influence decision-making, emotional responses, and social perception. Mothers who relied on it were praised for endurance, yet quietly warned against excess. The duality of opium, medicine and moral risk, remained embedded in social consciousness, guiding behavior without overt enforcement. In certain circles, the use of opium among women became a subtle social signal. Quiet discretion, measured consumption, and adherence to routine signaled both domestic competence and social awareness. Excess, carelessness, or visible dependence risked gossip, moral judgment, or exclusion from informal networks. Women learned to navigate these social pressures, balancing relief, household management, and propriety with remarkable skill. Opium, in this sense, was not only a medicinal tool but a subtle instrument of social negotiation. The wider consequences extended into family dynamics. Children, growing up with laudanum as part of the nightly ritual, internalized its patterns. Fathers, sometimes absent during the administration, observed calm children and patient wives, unaware of the quiet intervention that allowed domestic life to continue. Even the servants and helpers, moving through kitchens, nurseries, and corridors, were participants in a carefully orchestrated rhythm, subtly structured by the presence of opium. Public perception of women's use of laudanum was shaped by selective visibility. Observers noted calm behavior, proper management of domestic tasks, and social discretion, all of which reinforced norms. Yet behind closed doors, the amber liquid created a private layer of endurance, resilience, and subtle transformation. Women moved through the city's daily life with poise, their inner fatigue buffered by measured doses, while the broader society remained largely unaware of the mechanisms sustaining this calm. Cultural narratives around laudanum were also significant. Writers and social commentators alternated between cautionary tales and understated admiration. Stories of overuse and accidental harm circulated in newspapers and journals, serving as warnings. Yet more commonly, the quiet efficacy of laudanum in preserving household function and personal endurance went unnoticed in public discourse, recognized only in whispered exchanges and shared domestic knowledge. Even the ambient environment, the fog rolling over the Thames, the flicker of gas lamps, the distant tolling of church bells, interacted with the amber haze. Women's perception of the city was subtly altered. Streets seemed less harsh, noise less grating, the chill of evening less oppressive. The combination of environment and opium created a buffer, allowing endurance of the urban landscape in a way that was simultaneously practical and psychological. In the end, opium's presence in London extended beyond individual households. It structured social interactions, influenced public perception, and subtly shaped city life. The amber liquid, quietly administered in kitchens, nurseries, and private chambers, had effects that rippled through neighborhoods, shaping families, labor routines, and social norms. It was a quiet, pervasive companion in a city defined by both relentless activity and the persistent fog of human hardship. As night deepened, the city's rhythm slowed. Children slept, mothers rested, and even the distant noises of labor and commerce faded into the background. The amber haze of laudanum had done its work once again, maintaining calm, creating continuity, and shaping a subtle equilibrium that allowed life to continue amid the challenges of London's demanding environment. The quiet influence of opium, largely invisible yet deeply felt, was woven into the very fabric of the city's nocturnal life. Sometimes unseen traces. Its presence was woven into domestic life, family routines, and neighborhood rhythms, but it was not without consequences. Even measured doses could slowly accumulate, producing effects that touched body, mind, and social interactions in ways that were rarely dramatic yet always persistent. Physicians and writers occasionally observed these patterns, documenting fatigue, slight cognitive dulling, and emotional shifts. Women who used laudanum for years sometimes noticed a gentle haze settling over their perception of time and experience. Routine tasks, the folding of laundry, the care of children, the preparation of meals, continued, but always under the soft, steady influence of the amber tincture. These effects were subtle, invisible to casual observation, yet deeply felt in the quiet rhythms of the household. Long-term use also created patterns of dependency that were largely private. Households adapted, doses were carefully measured, schedules maintained, and the perception of control preserved. Yet beneath the surface, reliance grew, creating a delicate balance that required constant attention. Children observed these routines, absorbing behaviors and expectations that would shape their own understanding of endurance, care, and the subtle interplay between relief and necessity. Society's response to these hidden consequences was mixed. Occasionally, newspapers or pamphlets would recount instances of overuse or accidental overdose, often framing them as cautionary tales. Reformers, physicians, and moralists debated the balance between medicinal benefit and potential harm. Yet for most households, these warnings remained abstract, rare events that confirmed the need for discretion without altering the quiet, pervasive patterns of daily life. The amber haze also carried social implications beyond the home. Women who relied on laudanum moved through the city with a carefully maintained poise. Their calmness preserved domestic harmony, influenced social interactions, and shaped perceptions in workplaces, markets, and parlor rooms. The ripple effect of these quiet behaviors extended far beyond immediate households, subtly structuring the flow of London's daily life. Interestingly, these long-term effects were not solely negative. Many women found that measured use allowed them to maintain composure, emotional stability, and mental resilience amid the pressures of urban life. The amber tincture became a tool for endurance, shaping perception and facilitating care. Yet the line between utility and dependency remained fine, a shadowy boundary constantly navigated in private. Public morality, though cautious, often reinforced these quiet routines. Society admired patience, diligence, and composure, while discreetly acknowledging the invisible tools that sustained them. Gossip, when it occurred, focused on extremes rather than the ordinary. Most women operated in a space of subtle negotiation, balancing relief, propriety, and social expectation with quiet expertise. The amber liquid acted as both a support and a subtle social instrument, reinforcing networks, norms, and routines. Even in quieter districts and backstreets, where poverty, illness, and fatigue pressed heavily on households, opium provided a buffer. Nights were long, and labor was relentless. The amber tincture eased tension, facilitated sleep, and allowed endurance. It shaped perception, softened challenges, and created a rhythm in which survival became manageable. Its influence was pervasive, yet largely invisible, a quiet, almost poetic undercurrent in the fabric of city life. In the literature of the time, both medical and popular, the enduring effects of laudanum were described with a mixture of fascination and caution. Writers observed the gentle softening of daily experience, the faint haze over perception, and the subtle shaping of emotional life. Yet these accounts were often abstract, failing to capture the lived experience of women who balanced relief with household management, maternal responsibility, and social propriety. The amber tincture existed simultaneously as medicine, ritual, and a private companion. By the late 19th century, awareness of these patterns began to increase. Reformers and medical professionals started to advocate for careful regulation, standardized dosages, and alternative remedies. Still, for many households, the practices persisted quietly. Nights in London continued under the soft glow of gas lamps, the distant sounds of the city blending with the measured rhythms of household life. The amber liquid, once a private companion, remained deeply embedded in domestic patterns, quietly shaping perception, endurance, and the subtle order of urban existence. As the city slept, the legacy of laudanum was everywhere yet unseen. It softened the strains of fatigue, buffered the emotional weight of domestic labor, and maintained continuity in households large and small. The amber thread that ran through the lives of London's women connected private resilience with public order, subtly influencing social behavior, familial interaction, and the quiet endurance of daily life. The nights, long and foggy, carried the soft, pervasive presence of opium, a shadowy companion in the human struggle for calm, rest, and survival. As the 19th century progressed, the quiet presence of laudanum in London's households began to draw more sustained attention. Reformers, physicians, and social commentators increasingly observed the subtle but pervasive influence of opium on daily life. They noted both the practical utility and the hidden dangers. Women who relied on the amber tincture for composure, patience, and endurance, yet sometimes fell into patterns of slow dependence that were invisible to casual observation. Regulation, though gradual, began to emerge. Apothecaries were encouraged to maintain careful records, and prescription guidelines were introduced to prevent accidental overdoses, particularly among children. Public discourse oscillated between fascination and alarm, as newspapers and journals recounted isolated tragedies alongside measured accounts of the routine, controlled use that sustained households for decades. The city itself seemed to breathe a little differently as awareness increased. Foggy nights and gaslit streets were now intersected by cautionary tales and moral reflection. For many women, the amber tincture remained both companion and tool. It provided relief from the constant fatigue of domestic labor, the relentless care of children, and the ever-present challenges of urban life. Yet these same women, now subtly aware of the emerging social and medical scrutiny, navigated their routines with increased care. The careful administration of laudanum became a practice not only of personal survival but also of social prudence, blending domestic skill with an understanding of emerging societal norms. The quiet influence of opium extended beyond the home, leaving an imprint on London's collective memory. Stories of mothers, daughters, and neighbors who balanced endurance with subtle dependency became woven into the cultural consciousness. The amber tincture shaped patterns of social interaction, emotional regulation, and domestic hierarchy. It allowed households to function, children to sleep, and daily life to proceed in the foggy, gas-lit streets that defined the city. Yet the legacy was complex. While opium provided solace, it also highlighted the broader pressures faced by women in Victorian London: long hours of labor, societal expectations, and limited avenues for relief beyond the household. The amber tincture was a private instrument of survival, a quiet mediator between the weight of responsibility and the desire for rest. In this sense, laudanum was as much a reflection of society's demands as it was a substance in itself. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, increasing regulation, medical alternatives, and social reform began to reduce domestic reliance on opium. Awareness of long-term consequences and the subtle forms of dependence led to changes in prescribing practices and public perception. Still, the memory of those nights, quiet kitchens, softly sleeping children, the amber haze of measured relief, remained etched in cultural and historical consciousness. As we reflect on this story, we recognize a rhythm that was repeated countless times across London: the measured preparation of doses, the gentle administration, the quiet transformation of fatigue into calm. The amber tincture shaped the very fabric of domestic life, providing endurance, stability, and a subtle influence on social order. It was a pervasive yet invisible presence, entwined with both survival and societal expectation. In the end, the story of London's women and their quiet companion is one of resilience, subtle adaptation, and human ingenuity in the face of exhaustion and societal pressure. The amber haze of opium may have faded from everyday use, replaced by modern medicine and social reform, yet the historical traces remain, a reminder of how ordinary people, particularly women, navigated the complex, demanding cityscape of Victorian London. Tonight, as we imagine those long, foggy streets and the quiet households illuminated by gas lamps, we honor the endurance and subtle wisdom of these women. They carried themselves through nights both literal and metaphorical, guided by the amber tincture that softened fatigue and shaped experience. The story concludes, yet the soft, persistent rhythm of history continues, carrying whispers of resilience, discretion, and the quiet ways in which humanity adapts to the challenges of life.